The modular can be used as a powerful performance tool, and that's one of the reasons I got into modular. In fact, some of the first videos I made on this channel are a breakdown of the live case I used at the time. Since then, it went through several iterations and it's time for another detailed breakdown of my current setup. As always, this is not to show how things should be done, because what a good live case is completely depends on what you want from it. But you can take inspiration if you share similar wishes. Also, I want to explain the setup in detail before upcoming videos focusing on performing and making music with this modular setup. I start with a quick overview of the whole setup and then dive deeper into specific sections. The current setup consists of this single modular case, the Hydrasynth and the Oxi One. The modular case is the heart of the setup. There are two complete mono synth voices in here, each with quite a different sonic range. Percussion is kept relatively simple in this setup, just using a quad sample player with a couple of special tricks. Of course, there's enough modulation to keep the voices and percussion interesting, mostly using Droid. And the modular case is also used for mixing and effects to keep the setup portable. I'll talk about all of that in separate chapters. Beside the modular case, I included the ASM Hydrasynth. I just wanted a flexible polyphonic option. And the brain of the setup is the Oxi One. This is used to sequence the two modular voices, the polysynth, percussive patterns and so on. And it's used to store projects, clips and entire performances. I always like to write music for a specific setup, because it gives clear limitations. In this case, there's a lead voice, a bass voice, a polysynth and 4 samples that can make up things like a simple drum kit or background samples. There's a simple but good reverb and delay, and that's basically it. If you're interested in hearing what I do with this setup, head over to my other YouTube channel with music videos only. I just rebooted it completely and finally started uploading new material. More will follow soon. And as always, head over to my Patreon if you like to support my project and get access to hundreds of patch ideas I used in my videos. But now, let's dive right in. The core of my current live set are 3 synth voices. The music I'm working on is more driven by simple melodic parts, and 3 gives me enough options to layer tracks and create transitions. The modular case holds 2 mono voices with enough options to create sonic variety. The core of the modular voices is very simple. The first voice has 2 analog oscillators, sent through a mixer, low-pass filter and VCA to control the volume in the mix. A CV mixer is added before the filter frequency input, so filter modulation can be stacked. The external sequencer is used to send CV to both oscillators, as well as a gate to trigger an envelope opening the filter. There's also a basic LFO to add simple filter modulation. This setup is mostly used for the lower bass-heavy sounds. The ONA oscillators have a great analog sound while still being very stable and reliable. Because there's a simple mixer, the waveforms can be combined for interesting tuned setups, but also used to crossfade between waveforms or even octaves. For this voice, I use the Synth Black low-pass filter, which I mentioned a lot. I use it for its fat sound, saturation and flexibility in range because of its drive and input gain control. To control the different sources modulating the filter, I use the A2V Project MM, a 4:1 mixer. I have the envelope modulation here on top and the LFO here in the last input. Apart from this basic core modulation, the voices have more interesting modulation signals added, but I'll tackle those in the modulation chapter. A single envelope and LFO can do nice things already though. The other voice is just a single oscillator, but this time a digital one with a wide range of sounds. The A2V CDVCA is used as a filter VCA low-pass gate kind of combo module to shape the sound. Again with a mixer to stack modulation to the filter and another VCA to control the volume in the mix. The oscillator is sequenced with the external sequencer, again triggering a simple envelope. That envelope is used to modulate both the VCA and filter of the VCA to create that low-pass gate kind of effect. There's also a simple LFO modulating the filter. This voice is mostly used for lead sounds. The oscillator here used is the Clavis Twin Waves. I use one side as oscillator. The different algorithms and wave shaping options make it easy to switch between different sonic characters. CD VCA is used for filter VCA combo. It's a special module that colors the sound a lot. It adds a lot to the range of the voice, going from regular to all sorts of harsh and crunched sounds. Another 4-to-1 mixer is used to combine modulation to the filter, just like the other voice with the envelope here on top and LFO on the last input. Using the exact same filter modulation setup for both voices close to each other makes it very easy to create changes. Again, there's more modulation going on with the first voice as well, which I'll explain later, but this core is already a powerful voice. I recently made a video explaining my 6 go-to voices. That's a great video if you like to learn more about how these core voices can be used for different sounds. Finally, the Hydrasynth is used as a third voice, often for polyphonic sounds. I won't go in depth with it here as it's a very deep synth. I have to admit that for my current set I ended up with quite generic sounds that many polysynths can do, but I like it a lot. The arpeggiator plays an important part, and I also like how easy it is to set up deep macro controls. These make it very easy to plan and control progress or change a patch during a track. Percussion doesn't play a big part in my current music, but samples still are a key component. If you like deep, detailed techno, you probably want more control over percussive elements. But in my current music, I'm going back to my roots, focusing more on melody. Samples are often used to create either more analog-style drum kit sounds, melodic sounds, or background samples. All this is done with the Squab Rample, a 4-channel sample player with good performance controls. You can select a feature like pitch, sample length or filtering and control that feature per channel with the knobs. There are also 4 CV inputs you can link to any feature of any channel, which is very nice. It's still a bit limited though, but I came up with a simple solution. The core features I often like to have direct control over is sample volume and length. So each sample output is sent to a simple summing VCA. This way I can use the level controls on the VCA to control sample volume in the mix, or even use a VCA to control the length or decay of a sample, for example the decay of a head. This also means I don't have to use the core controls and CV inputs on the rample for level or length, so those controls can be used for other things. I mostly end up using the knobs for a DJ style low pass high pass filter per channel. CV inputs are mostly modulated with flexible modulation sources, but more on that later. The summing VCA is effectively used to create a drum bus. That mix is sent through a compact drive distortion module, in this case the E-Wave Germania. This adds a bit of range to the presence of sampled sounds on the fly. So I load the sample player with rather clean samples, but I can make something like noise or a drum kit fatter or distorted. I often use the 4 channels to create a kick, snare, head and fill setup. Often using Rample's special trick to have a couple of different samples in each channel, playing a random one each time it's triggered. This creates a kit that feels more alive. But of course, samples can be used for other things than percussion. I also use it to play melodic samples, for example single notes recorded from the Yamaha CP. Again, with multiple randomized samples per channel for interesting dynamics. And another thing I do a lot is using one or more channels as background textures. This is great to create intros, outros or transitions between tracks. This works a bit like a 4-channel tape loop player, using the built-in filters to fade sounds in and out. The randomized samples is a trick I use a lot, but just like with the voices, modulation can bring more depth to the percussion. Good modulation is a crucial part of any modular setup. For live sets, it's important to have enough modulation to automate dynamics to your sounds, but also not so much it gets confusing or hard to dial in a sweet spot. In this setup there are quite a lot of modulation sources. Most of them have dedicated functions, but some are used as flexible flying modulation sources. First up, here I have the dual smooth random voltage generator I designed with ADAC. You can learn more about it here if you like. This brings a lot of automated flowing changes to the sounds, exactly why I designed it. A regular and inverted random wave are added to the two monosynth voices. This can be used to create slow inverted attention shifts between the voices, or faster fluctuating variations. Some of the other outputs of the module are used as flying modulation sources, meaning the destination isn't fixed for an entire set. These can be plugged wherever I like to bring a bit of extra motion to a sound that needs it. Favorite examples are a very subtle amount of modulation to the second oscillator of the bass voice, and wave shape. Another modulator is the second side of the clavis twin waves used as LFO. I mostly use it to modulate the side used as oscillator via internal connections, either to add audio rate FM or wave shape modulation. But the output of the LFO is also sent to the A to V matrix mixer, so I can modulate the filter of the voices with an audio rate LFO as well. Just like the oscillator, the LFO has different algorithms, so I can swap the modulation for something like a sample and hold style signal or even noise. In case you like to see the voice modulation in the flowchart, here are the two basic voices again. A random and inverted random voltage is added modulating the filters, as well as an audio rate LFO. The LFO can also be used to modulate the lead oscillator, and flying random voltages can be used to modulate things like wave shape or pitch of both oscillators as well. In this setup, most of the modulation is done by Droid. If Droid is new to you, have a look at these introduction videos I made. In short, I can use software on my laptop to set up functions and features for Droid and control those with the controllers here. In this setup, those functions are rather basic, but there's a lot. First off, there are two LFOs and two attack decay envelopes used for the two core mono voices. I have control over the LFO shape, level and frequency. And there's direct control over the attack and decay settings of the envelopes. I also added internal random signals to modulate the envelope stages. These controls can be used to add randomization to each stage individually. Subtle randomization to simple attack decay envelopes can add a lot of dynamics without much effort. On top of that, I use another envelope trick I like a lot. Here there are 3 8-step trigger sequencers running from top to bottom. Each can be reset, and I can set the length to 2, 3, 5 or 8. These trigger patterns each trigger their own attack decay envelope. The first is added to the envelope modulating the first voice, and the second envelope is added to the envelope modulating the second voice. Then I can use these 4 controls to mix the primary triggered envelope of each voice with the second triggered envelope. This might be easier to understand when you hear it. Here's a bass line with the core envelope triggered from the sequencer. Let's create a second trigger pattern on Droid and mix in the second envelope. I can even push the mix to just use the second envelope. This simple trick makes it very easy to create subtle attention shifts in looping sequences, both for the bass and lead voice. On top of that, the envelope of the second voice, the one with the 2 oscillators, has an extra feature. I can switch it to be a full ADSR envelope with this switch, with full control over all 4 stages here. That's used when I want the bass voice to be a slower pad or sustained organ-like sound. The third trigger sequencer with envelope here is used as flying modulation source. I can use the endless encoders to set attack and decay times, as well as the depth of randomization to the shape and the output level. It has its own output and is occasionally modulating things like the filter, sample length, and so on. Then there's a third LFO. This is also used as flying modulation source. I use it to modulate things like the pulse width of the bass voice, wave shape, panning, and so on. I also added a slew limiter that can be used on an oscillator pitch. And there's yet another attack decay envelope used for sidechaining, which I'll come back to in the last chapter. So in short, Droid provides 3 LFOs, 3 trigger sequencers, 5 attack decay envelopes, 1 ADSR, a slew limiter, a couple of stepped random generators to modulate the envelopes, an inverted ducking envelope, multiple clock divisions, as well as a little clock trigger delay I'll explain later. If I'm honest, the Droid setup I use here is quite a bit bigger than necessary for what I do with it in this set. But the thing I like about Droid is the flexibility. If I want to add or change a modulation source, I can easily do so without buying or swapping modules. It can also do completely different things. For example, I also made a patch for this setup when I want to improvise with only the modular case and no external synth or sequencer, in which case Droid is used for melodic and percussive triggers as well. There are many options. I recently started using the Oxi One as sequencer, and that changed my workflow quite a bit. The Oxi One replaced my Arturia Beatstep Pro, which I have to say felt a bit like leaving a trusted old friend, but I just ran against the limitations of the Beatstep Pro. For me, the key selling point of the Oxi is the flexibility in setting up the sequencers. There are 4 sequencers which can easily be used as regular mono or polyphonic sequencers, but each sequencer can also be used in multi-mode, meaning each sequencer can sequence multiple voices. In this setup, I mostly use pretty regular sequencer tricks, even though the Oxi One is capable of a lot more. I use 2 mono sequences to sequence the modular mono voices. This is done with the pipe expander, so there's only a single cable from the sequencer to the modular, and then from the expander to oscillator pitch, clock, envelope triggers, and so on. The third sequencer is used in poly mode to control the Hydrasynth via MIDI cable. And finally, the fourth sequencer is used in multi-mode to create 4 trigger patterns for the samples, mostly the drums as well as a clock and sidechain triggers. But just to be clear, this multi-mode can sequence multiple melodic mono voices as well. I also like the Oxi One has a better visual architecture for projects and complex melodic sequences. I made different projects with multiple songs each. Just seeing all the clips for the different tracks laid out like this helps me memorize and perform a live set. Mostly I don't even use song mode. I like to launch clips manually to feel more connected to the development. Also, that makes it easy to loop a section a bit longer if sounds need more adjusting or a break isn't ready yet. If there's a long detailed song structure playing without hands-on control, I always feel like I'm chasing the progress instead of controlling it. When writing, I mostly use a mix of live sequencing and MIDI to CV conversion. Oxi One is great for this. I can program and create sequences on the sequencer, for example to sequence the bass, but at the same time use a MIDI channel input from Ableton to sequence a lead I'm still working on, and at the same time use a MIDI controller input to Ableton through the third sequencer to control the Hydrasynth and search for chords by playing a keyboard. Often it takes a bit of time before things come together and are all stored in clips, but I'll come back to my writing process in another video. For this setup, I decided to do all mixing and effects in the modular. But I'll be honest, if you want easy and affordable, an external mixer with effects pedals has a lot of benefits. In my current live set though, I already added the external synth and sequencer to carry along, and I want to stay portable. The Chaos Devices Praga mixer is the core of the audio mixer. I like the simplicity, level meters and big knobs instead of fiddly sliders. Incoming here are the lead voice, bass voice, the Hydrasynth, for which I use a simple mono cable through an input gain module here to bring it up to level, and finally the Rample mixed drum bus. The mix output of Praga is sent to an output module for bigger jacks and master control. Remember though, a lot of mixing happens before Praga. In a live set like this, a lot of mixing power is used, which I think is something people easily overlook. There's the quad VCA mixer to mix the drums. There's a 4:1 mixer here to mix the two oscillators of the bass voice. I can even add noise or samples to that mix if needed. Of course, that's beside the two 4:1 mixers here used to control the modulation to the filters of the voices, and the envelope CV mixing done with the in-droid. On top of that, I use another 4:1 mixer here for the effects. Praga uses a single knob per channel for the effect sense. It can send an audio channel either to effect sense A or effect sense B. I send A to the Happy Nerding effects aid here, mostly used as a set and forget reverb. And B is sent to the Erica Synth delay. Both effects are returned stereo to Praga. Here you see the 4-channel inputs to Praga with output module. However, with this setup I can't send a sound to both effects from the mixer, so I send A to a separate mixer before hitting the reverb. Then send B to the delay and a copy of send B with stackable into the mixer before the reverb, so I can add delay send into the reverb as well. Praga also has individual channel outputs, so I can even send each channel to a unique mix if I like, and these outputs are also great for multi-tracking. As for the effects, the reverb is mostly a fixed but nice stereo reverb, but extra modulation can be added using any of the flying modulation sources if I want. The delay is receiving a clock from Droid to create tap tempo delay. When this module is synced, the time control knob becomes a clock divider, which is very useful, but that removes the subtle tape delay nudge sound I like. So I added a simple trigger delay to the clock output from Droid, used with a control to nudge the clock output for some manual effect wobbles. Just like with the reverb, any flying modulation source like a smooth random voltage can be used to modulate the delay time further. And finally, there's a very simple sidechain setup. Whenever the first sample, mostly used for a kick, is triggered, a copy of that signal triggers an inverted envelope in Droid. I have control over the attack and decay time and output level. This signal can be used to modulate one or more VCAs on Praga, to duck the level of a voice and create a classic sidechain pumping effect, for example on the bass or Hydrasynth. That about sums it up. Nothing crazy, just the ingredients needed to make some tracks. If there are any questions, feel free to ask in the comment sections. If you'd like to learn more, have a look here, and as always, smash that like, subscribe and bell button if you want to see more modular content from me. But that's it for now, thanks for watching and see you next time.